Okay, hello everyone. We're gonna launch our Georgia O'Keeffe project today, and thank you for all your hard work on Warhol. I hope that that's been enjoyable for everybody, even though the project turned out to be longer than I had expected. I did that banana sample in the closet in like 15 minutes, and it's not great, but I was like, oh, okay, this is just trying to see if it was manageable, doable. It seemed like it would be, but the tracing was harder for some than I had expected, but hopefully still a good experience to learn about Warhol and get a taste of his art. And I think this project should be pretty straightforward and fun to do the watercolors. So let's go through the slideshow and just go over the project and try to make it as short and sweet as possible. So let's see, here are the slides. Okay, here's Georgia O'Keeffe. She is known as by some as like the mother of American modernism, and she is one of the most photographed artists ever because she had an affair with and married Alfred Stieglitz, who was one of the he was much older than her, so he was born in like 1860s, so he was one of these first people to make photography really famous, to really pioneer it as an art form. He had his own studio called 291 in New York City, where he would display artistic photography work and other avant-garde modern artists. And so that's how he and Georgia met. She went to his gallery there. But just a little background, she wanted to be an artist as a child, and she, it wasn't as common for a woman. She was one of the first American women to be like a really famous, prominent artist. She at first was an art instructor at a university, and then she did some abstract charcoal drawings that she sent to a friend in New York City, and the friend showed them to Stieglitz, and he decided to put them in his gallery without even asking O'Keeffe. And she actually went there because she would go there frequently. It was the hub of the art world. And she was like, my stuff is up. What are you doing? And that's kind of when their attraction and their affair started, and he would put her artwork on display all the time. So she was having gallery showings all the time, which is part of what made her famous early on. Let's see. So she would have annual shows there, and here's a picture kind of just shows she was a pioneer of abstraction. Here's just one of her early abstract pieces. And it may or may not be part of a flower. And I don't think so, because she calls it Blue One. So this is a good example of how she experimented with abstraction, but she became very famous for her pictures of paintings of flowers. And first she used acrylics, but then she really became a watercolor painter. So we're going to be painting flowers like this and watercolor today. And just, it's different what she's doing, that she's looking very close up and filling the whole canvas with this flower and like showing it to us the way that she sees it close up. Much different than a still life or the way that flowers had traditionally been presented. And they have that same kind of abstract quality where for a moment you might look at them and not even be sure, what am I looking at? You see, she has lots of organic shapes, but from the title, and you look close, you're like, okay, yeah, that is a flower. I'm looking at a flower really close up. Here's one of her really famous ones, petunias. So lots of bright colors, extreme close-up detail. And she once said it was in the 1920s when nobody had time to reflect. So kind of when the modern age, where people becoming very, very busy, lots of modernization, industrialization, that she says, I saw a still life painting with a flower that was perfectly exquisite, but so small you really could not appreciate it. So she wants to do this writ large, these big flowers to be in your face, to make people stop and really see the flower that they would otherwise ignore. The other thing she also was famous for painting was modern skyscrapers. She and Stieglitz lived at the top of a large high-rise in New York City. Excuse me. And so she would paint the skyscrapers and scenes from out her window. but I don't think she really celebrated as she was showing kind of what the modern landscape was, but she really, you'll see in her later work with the flowers, and she also becomes famous for painting the New Mexico desert. She loved the natural landscape. But it was interesting that she, would draw these just modern cityscapes because that was seen as something more masculine to paint. So she was kind of breaking some boundaries there. Lake George, I'm not exactly sure. I think this is on the East Coast. This is a place she and Stieglitz would go often. But in 1929, she had a friend invite her out to New Mexico, and she fell in love with the New Mexico landscape. She just thought it was haunting. It called to her. And so she started going out there every summer, which to me seems, I don't know, I guess it's maybe cold there in the winter. I'm not sure. I know some of us are from New Mexico, but it was burning hot there in the summer. So she would go and paint in the heat of the day. She would drive her, it says on this outline it was a Jeep, but I should have edited that. It was a Model A. She would drive out and paint from the back of her car. And when it got too hot, she would lay under the car and just sleep in the shade. But she was out there roughing it. But just loved to drive out to these remote places and paint the New Mexico landscape. There are many, many paintings of the hills, and she just felt like she couldn't. It was just so mysterious, and she could never quite capture it. She would paint it over and over again. We have another flower here too, but so she continued to do those and just really note to the kids how the flower fills up the whole canvas, and just really those details. Or for instance, here she does an even bigger close-up. So we're going to be doing flower and just point out you could do that close-up or even more close-up depending on how you see the flower and you want someone else to see the flower. Something else that she became famous for doing was collecting these bones from the New Mexico landscape and then taking them back to New York and arranging them with flowers and painting them and just creating these compositions where these bones were just front and center. This is not my favorite, but this is definitely unique kind of modern composition, and interesting how she just puts that the bone front and center with the flowers just kind of as an accent. An interesting view of that. So let's see. Here's another famous one of her flowers. I like her quote here. She says, "When you take a flower in your hand and really look at it, it's your world for the moment. I want to give that world to someone else. Most people in the city rush around so they have no time to look at a flower. I want them to see it whether they want to or not." So she painted those cityscapes, but I don't think she was celebrating the city life. She wanted people to stop and to see nature and not lose that connection. Here's an interesting series she did called Pelvis Series. It's a pelvis bone that she found, and she would hold up against different landscapes. Just had a unique way of looking at things, showing things, looking at things from different angles than perhaps we normally would. I thought this was neat to see a picture of her actually painting these. You don't always get to see the artist with their work like that. And here she is in the New Mexico desert, and she's obviously much older here. She continued to paint for many, many years, but then her eyesight did go, which was very sad for her. She said she could still see what she wanted to paint, but she could not execute it. So that became very difficult for her. But she was a real go-getter. I read that age 74, this is on the outline, she went on her first of 3 river rafting trips down the Colorado River. So she didn't slow down until, for a long time. And later in life, she started to travel a lot, and she was mesmerized by the view of the clouds from the airplanes when she started flying. And so she did a series of paintings of that. That's kind of what the most famous series that she did later on in life, these sky above clouds paintings. So she did over 900 pieces, and there it says there are over 500 photographs of her just by her husband alone. So she's very prolific and well documented. So let's talk about the project. I think that kids will enjoy being able to use the watercolors. So what we're going to do, I'll show you some examples. So here from years past that students did. So what they're going to I orient this way, they're going to have either, there's a bunch of flowers like this, or there's pictures of flowers like this that they can look at to paint. And they're going to have a small, maybe smaller than this, practice piece where they can just take a pencil and outline what they want to do. Because I think the tendency is going to be to draw the flowers small. We're not used to looking at a flower up close like this and making our picture fill the whole page. So they're probably going to draw it too small and have to erase it. So this is like their practice thing to get the idea of, okay, it's going to fill the entire paper like this. Here's a little practice one. Or I have another one right here. No, I mean like this. So just a practice. They do, and then they can play around with the colors. I don't think that O'Keeffe always did the exact colors. They're just going to get watercolors like this. There's actually some glitter and metallic ones in there too, if you want to give that to them as an option. And we have nicer brushes. So don't use the junky brush in here. And just put it to the side or toss it even. We have nicer brushes in the closet of various sizes that they can use. That will give them a better product. So they pick their flower. They do it up close in pencil. They can play around with the watercolors, what colors they want to do. But I would say with the watercolors, before they do anything, tell them to open it, put a few drops of color on each one, and they could turn this over and kind of play around with how to get different shades of color. Like, see, okay, what color, how is that turning out with just a few drops? Do I need to add a little bit more water, a little bit less? Just play around with making different shades depending on how much water they add, so they can kind of get a feel for how to make the color that they want for the larger flowers. So this practicing with the watercolors maybe on the back, and then sketching, making sure that they have a plan here and to fill the space. I mean, what I would do, what I'm probably planning to do, is to time them. Say maybe we're going to have 15 minutes to do this. When the timer goes off, you've planned enough. By that point, you've probably at least drawn it and have an idea what colors you're going to use. Then we're going to go to a bigger, nicer sheet of watercolor paper and do the whole thing. If you want to skip the practice when you can, I think it would be advantageous for them to plan it, or else you might get a lot of really small ones to just help them to catch the vision and to know exactly what they want to execute. But then they're going to do it writ large here on the bigger paper, and you might not even... this I think is bigger than the paper that I have. The paper that I ordered I think is going to be big enough for you to still mount it. So they can still lightly do it in pencil and then go over it boldly in the watercolors. So, but just definitely a cup of water for each person. And I bought the nice, just like regular paper towels, so I don't have to use those thin ones, so that they can, you might just, so at the beginning, talk to them about putting a little bit of water in each one, how to, I mean, maybe more with younger classes, they need this, but remind the older ones, you know, you rinse off your brush completely between each one. And this is how, you know, how you tap it on the side of the glass to not get too much water, just enough. But I think that's something that'll be useful for them to practice on that first flower, to really get a handle on, okay, how do I get the color that I want onto the paper, and not just like soak it. So a cup of water, the little paper towel for each one to blot their brush. We have the nicer brushes. We have some of the metallic and glitter paints if they think that would be fun. Regular watercolors, so the small watercolor paper to practice. And then the big one, we have lots of samples like this to show them, and lots of options for different flowers, or pictures of flowers that they can use for inspiration. And that's basically it. So you're going to leave them to dry. This will be another drying one. This is the only other painting project we have this year. So you'll have to go back and mount. But I think that everyone will be able to do this and be proud of it and have fun with it. So I think that's it. Any questions or yeah, anything, just feel free to call me. I've had a few times where people were like, oh, I can't find something to order. Just call me or text me first instead of emailing me, because I'll notice that first. I don't always check my email on my phone. Anyways, thank you so much for all your help, and yeah, I hope that goes smoothly. Thanks so much.